I met today's guest at a mastermind meeting that I attended in Nashville. You may have seen the pictures if you follow me on social media. I was introduced to him. I didn't know what he did. I didn't know what his background was. I knew absolutely nothing about him. I just knew I wanted him to be my best friend for the rest of my life immediately. I fell in love with this guy, just his energy, his manner, his way of being. I just wanted to be around him. And the more I learned about him, the more I realized that that's what the world wants because he just brings magic to a part of the world that people don't pay attention to, which I'll get to in his official bio. But the following day after I met him, he was on stage and he was speaking to a group of entrepreneurs. And these are some shiny penny, pretty go-getter types entrepreneurs. And he brought up the subject of trauma. Now, in a room like that, we're trying to learn skills and business building and being visible and branding and all that. And this man stands up there and talks about our trauma and brings us through an exercise of being real and being present. And I've never seen anybody navigate that so deftly, so articulately, and so safely in a group of people who wasn't expecting it. So I said, I have to have him on the podcast to talk about this particular thing. Trauma is one of the reasons why we're in overwhelm almost all the time. So officially, Bryan Post is an adopted and former foster child. He's one of the world's foremost child behavior and adoption experts and the founder of the Post Institute. We'll put the links to everything that I mentioned in our show notes. It's a love-based, family-centered principles and concept offered by Bryan. Oh, wait, excuse me. The love-based, family-centered principles and concepts offered by Bryan have been taught to more than 1 million parents and professionals around the world. You can receive a free copy of one of his 11 best-selling books on adoption and parenting, From Fear to Love. And I'll put from feartolove.com book.com in the show notes. Currently, he's the clinical director for Parents in Training, a nonprofit providing wraparound services to adoptive families throughout Northern California. Bryan, thank you for being on the show.
Mark, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dude, your origin story is, profound, and what you've done with how you started life and what, kind of the entrepreneurial vision that you've married to, your calling is really brilliant. So how did you, if you give me the story, how did you get to be this guy? Why did you choose to care about adoptive families the way you do?
I don't think I chose it. I think God made me to do this. And I really feel like every moment since my conception has been engineered towards a deeper understanding of the adopted child and adopted family experience, but also of just the human experience. So I feel like I've through the course of my work and really through the course of my own self-understanding, which was the biggest part of all of it, is coming to a deeper understanding of who I was as an individual, as a byproduct of my experiences, not just my environmental experiences growing up with my parents who struggled, but also my genetic experiences, my DNA experiences, and then my energetic experience. Just that deeper self-awareness and understanding layered on top of my own adoption story. I feel like it just kind of positioned me to have an understanding that's just really simple. I mean, it's not real complicated. I was fortunate that I grew up in the decade of I grew up professionally in the decade of the brain, which was the 90s. So I just, everything I felt was just confirmed through this explosion of neuroscience.
Oh, amazing. You said at the beginning, you said that when a adoption in and of itself, as beautiful, like we think of adoption as this beautiful, wonderful thing, and it's amazing. It's parents choosing to be in a child's life. But you said that that's traumatic in and of itself. And when you explained it, I finally got it.
Sure.
Can you explain why adoption is, a traumatic experience for the child?
Well, because physiologically, it is when an infant is growing inside of the womb of their biological mother, physiologically they are connected to that individual at a level that we only can comprehend biologically as the love we feel for our parents. And ultimately, in some situations, the hate we feel for our parents because of the rejection, the enormous rejection that is in the face of the love. And so for that 9 months of seconds, of minutes, of hours, of days, of weeks, of months, totality, suddenly that has gone away. It's disrupted. So that is a major life trauma. And that doesn't even take into account the developmental, environmental, physical exposure the infant goes through while they're in utero, right? I'm just talking about the disruption.
Right.
And in almost exclusively with abused children, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglected, when they are removed from their family of origin, they are still traumatized. Even if that family of origin is traumatic, it is the only family they know. It is the only experience they know. And so the nuances of that, it just gets layered, in so many different ways. And then adopted children never have a chance to grieve because we don't grieve in our society. We don't like
Right.
we don't like upset feelings. So then the baby can't really grieve because everyone's trying to soothe the baby and calm the baby down. The toddler can't grieve. The 5-year-old can't, the 10-year-old can't, the 15-year-old can't. So it doesn't matter the age you're adopted. It's still, I believe it is an irreparable disruption to the physiology.
My guess is it's confusing internally too, because you're supposed to be really grateful, and you really are grateful if you're adopted into a good family, but then you have these feelings, and how do you work through them? So if you want to know more, if you're an adoptive parent, if you've been adopted, if this is a subject that you want to know more of, I will put the link to Bryan's book. It's sold almost 1 million copies. It's crazy successful. And also, I'll give you a link to his YouTube channel where he talks about this in such eloquent ways. We're going to shift the conversation. So we all have some sort of trauma. When you talked about the trauma of being adopted and not being placed on the chest of the mother who and breastfed, and then that continuity from who you were inside and who you're now interacting with, it gave me a flashback to my infancy when I was first born, and I had a little moment of trauma because I know some things about that from myself. We all have trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we all have trauma. Can you explain what trauma is? I love your definition.
Trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable, which does not have an opportunity to be expressed, processed, and understood. That's the difference between a short-term stressful experience versus a long-term, potentially life-altering, brain-altering traumatic experience. Is when you don't have an opportunity to talk about it, to cry about it, to mourn it, to make sense of it, then talk about it and cry about it and mourn it and make sense of it, and then talk about it and over and over and over and over as much as the brain needs. Because see, the reason we oftentimes compulsively talk about painful experiences is because our brain is trying to make sense out of it. And until your brain makes sense out of it, till your brain and your physiology make sense out of it and make it coherent, you can't let it go. And that's really the basis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You have a traumatic experience that you're not able to express, process, and understand. And it gets stored in a fragmented way in your body. And most of the time, especially if we're talking about, people who, but it could be anyone. So someone has a car wreck. In our society, we are so quick to want to get that person over it. We don't give them the space to express, process, and understand multiple times. And I like to use a really basic analogy of getting a speeding ticket. As soon as you get pulled over, you are texting or calling someone to let them know, right? And then if you don't text and call them right then, as soon as you drive off, you are texting and calling someone, and then you'll tell someone else, and then you'll tell someone else.
Right.
That's just a very mild way of how we process stressful experiences.
And my brother died a few weeks ago. He died like 2 weeks before you and I met, and in a very dramatic, very painful way.
Mm,
And I found myself repeating stories about what happened. And
mm,
it almost felt like I was talking out of school. Like I really didn't want to share those details with people, but I
mm.
felt like I had to. And now you're telling me what that was is my brain, my psyche was trying to make sense of what I just experienced so that I can move through it and let it go.
And here's what I believe, and science is more and more speaking to this. When we have significant loss like that, it's physiologic, and it goes back to that adoption experience. It's physiologic. When someone significant in your life dies, you have a physiologic disruption, and the talking about it is just a physical manifestation of your cells trying to make sense of that energy loss, that disruption, that big, it's like an earthquake, right? And so you have to vibrate that to make sense of it so that can eventually all settle back down.
Yeah, it
And
was
if
funny. I had a workshop planned. I had for months. I had planned to be at this workshop a week after my brother died, uh, that dealt with trauma, and it dealt with childhood trauma. And I was going to cancel it, and I decided to go anyway. And I processed there the grief, the anger, the confusion, and everything that happened there. So that, and it was fortuitous that that was the place to go because society didn't want to hear me talk about all of the, there's a few friends who definitely would listen to me, but most people would just want to comfort me or send me cookies and plants.
you're exactly right. And it reminds me of when my sister was killed in a car accident. I was actually scheduled to go lead a therapist training, and I went ahead and went,
Hmm.
and it was a space for me to process that grief and that loss, which I would not have had that space otherwise. You can't. It's outside of the norm of the way most familial systems function.
Yeah, my first interview, Sejal Thacker, wonderful woman. It was the first interview I did after my brother died, and I said, "Look, Sejal, I'm sorry, I may be a little bit off because this just happened." And she said, "I just lost my best friend." we
Yeah,
started the we started the podcast off with, well, we're both grieving and we're both a little off. Let's see what this
fantastic.
does, right? So we were both real with it, and it was really cool. Um, so I'm curious, with all this work you've done for yourself on trauma and your brain and coping mechanisms and all that stuff, how does that translate to everyday people? Like how what have you learned as an adult that translates to all of us with all this trauma work with childhood?
I mean, I'll make it really simple, Mark, because I do the same thing for parents in helping them understand their children. Is trauma causes us to become stress sensitive and fearful. And one of the single greatest tasks is to become more and more mindful of our stress reactions and our fear based anxiety. And the best way to do that is to practice mindfulness. And the best pathway to mindfulness is to practice your breathing. And so I really do boil it down that in that simple of a nature because I need that for my own brain, right? I need things really simple. So being stress sensitive and being fearful, that's what it comes down to. And when I can dial into those things for myself, I can become more aware of them, and then I can more readily dial into them for others and in my interactions with others.
Every time you tell a story of an interaction with a parent, you start every interaction when they text you or call you with, all right, first let's take 3 deep breaths.
Yeah. The first thing I have to do is breathe. The first thing I have to do. And then I'm going to listen to them and I'm breathing through the process. And in fact, on occasion, I'll say, breathe with me. But a lot of times, just by me breathing and being present and asking them what's going on, I can hear the anxiety in their voice go down because I'm creating that feedback loop of regulation that they're looking for. That's the reason they call. They're looking for support. They're looking for that level of understanding that they're not used to experiencing. And so on occasion, I'll say to a parent, stop for a minute. And whether it's in person or on Zoom or on a phone, and you'd be surprised how hard that is for them to stop. And so I have to be really regulated myself, because it's like trying to stop a car with the gas still on and you start applying brakes. I mean, you got to really apply those brakes. And so when I say to a parent, stop, I have to be really committed to that. And then I'll say, no, stop. Take a deep breath. Breathe with me. And I just have to slow them completely down. And it's just what the brain's doing.
In my Mastering Overwhelm workshop, at the end of the first third, when I'm doing some mindset stuff and how overwhelm lives between our ears, I give them a couple of Zen Buddhist exercises, that they can practice to get present.
Yeah.
And the first thing I do is I say, all right, we're going to take 3 deep breaths together. Now, I'm terrified of public speaking. I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of talks, and I'm still scared of public speaking, whether it's 10 people in a room or it's 5,000 people in an arena or something. So I do my workshop, and I'm a little keyed up when I first walk into a room of strangers and I'm doing this workshop. And then I have them do the 3 deep breaths. And then I tell them to notice how different my voice is. Now that we've taken 3 deep breaths, I'm different. I'm settled in. Do you feel the change in the room? And I'm always shocked that these CEOs will go, yes, it's so different. The 3 deep breaths into their belly changes the physiology, changes the rat wheel in the head, and brings us to be presence.
Yes, it changes the vibration in the entire room, in the entire system. It's just we can't see it. We just can't see how stirred up it all is around us. But yeah, it changes the whole vibration in the room.
So again, since you understand trauma so much, how are we going about our daily lives? So I talk about this concept called allostatic load. And I'm the world's foremost authority on this allostatic load because I read one article, spoke about it on the podcast, and now everybody thinks I'm the expert on allostatic load. I'm not. But anyway, it's the cumulative level of stress you have in your body. So and as I say, if you wake up in the morning and you open up Twitter, now you know who to be mad at, right? Then you turn on Morning Joe or Fox News, now you know who to hate, right? And then someone spills the milk in the kitchen. So your allostatic load. So when you come out to your driveway, right, you have very little capacity left to handle that person who cut you off on the way to work, right? If you woke up and you meditated and you exercised and you didn't turn on your TV, you might have they are in a hurry, go on. But instead you're like ready to follow them and wonder how much insurance you have if you run them off the road, right? But when the allostatic load, it marries to what you just said, is we have a sensitivity to stress when we're traumatized and fear. And I think the allostatic load is the same thing. How do you get people to understand that they're not fighting a visible fight? Do you know what I'm saying? Like they think they're mad at the cashier. They think that they're mad at their boss, but that's not what's really going on.
So one, you said, how do you get them to understand? I think that's probably a much bigger task overall. Stephen Covey said, to understand is to do. And, a lot of times people will say, well, yeah, I understand. And it's like I have this anchor in me from this Stephen Covey quote for so long. In my mind, I'm like, no, you don't truly understand, because to understand is to do. But the reality is that all emotional reactivity stems from unfinished business. We have spent so much time.
Whoa. Say that again.
All emotional reactivity stems from unfinished business.
Yes. Go on.
The moment you find yourself being stressed out about some person or some situation, it has far more to do with you than it does the person or the situation, because stress causes us to do 3 things. Stress causes us to react from the past, obsess about the future, and it takes us out of the present. And so we have lived and grown up in this society and these families of victimhood and blame. And so we preach a good message about taking responsibility, but no one's taking responsibility. What we are doing is being reactive. And because we are conditioned for reactivity, we're always looking for someone to blame. We're always looking for someone to protect ourselves from. And that really speaks to how stressed we are. We're stressed and we don't really realize it. And you call it the allostatic load. I call it the window of tolerance. We all wake up with a window of tolerance for how much stress we can handle. And over the course of a day, that window of tolerance gets smaller. And then I always say to people, by the time you get home, your window of tolerance for how much stress you can handle, you spend it on the people that matter the least, and the people that matter the most get the least of you. And so it is a much bigger undertaking in helping someone understand it, because the first part is to realize that the only battle is the battle inside. It is the reactivity to the world around you, where your amygdala, your fear receptor, that came online back when we were cavemen, it's not the same anymore, but it's still looking for the saber-tooth tiger. In this instance, the guy cutting you off in traffic is the saber-tooth tiger. And before you know it, you've ran off in this fear-based will in your world.
I'm stealing. So I'm doing a workshop tomorrow for a bunch of CEOs. And I'm stealing so much of what you do.
Awesome.
Part of my workshop, what I do is I teach them how, we're looking at saber-tooth tigers all day long, and saber-tooth tigers don't even really exist. And we're not really in physical danger most of the time.
Yeah.
Then I put up a list of, so what do you make saber-tooth tigers? And I put taxes, payroll, right? All those things, because we make those things saber-tooth tigers instead of what they really are. It's freaking brilliant. So
let me add something to that real quick, because I feel like it'll be pertinent to your talk.
I'm stealing
Joseph,
it.
Joseph Ledoux, New York University neuroscientist, wrote a book called The Emotional Brain. Real simple little quote that I've used for 20 years. In times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. When we become stressed, and you can experience stress through any of your sensory pathways. We have 5 primary ones, and then we have 4 secondary ones. So you can become stressed at a brainstem level through any of these sensory pathways. The moment you become stressed, your thinking is hijacked. Your thinking becomes confused and distorted. You're not thinking clearly. The guy cutting you off becomes a saber-tooth tiger. The IRS envelope becomes a saber-tooth tiger. Your wife frowning at you and you not understanding it becomes a saber-tooth tiger. And then your short-term memory is suppressed. So in that moment, you can't remember that it's just a guy who's probably stressed out, or it's just a letter from the IRS. It doesn't mean you're going to die. Or your wife's frown probably had nothing to do with you. She was probably thinking about something else and wasn't even looking at you, actually. And so I've always said, if teachers could get that for schools, it would change education, because you would realize you can't educate a stressed out child because their brains can't remember. And it carries over to so many things.
I heard somewhere that when you're in a trauma response, there's really nothing you can do because it's taken over. And they talk about addiction is a trauma response. Once you take the drink, once you open up the porn hub, once you do that, you're kind of on a slide, and there's nothing you're really going to be able to do about it because it's taken over. Is that what you're saying?
See, and I get into these nuances. It is a trauma reaction. It is a stress reaction. And even I like to even get away from trauma and just get to stress, because trauma, people are immediately like, oh, I don't have any trauma. Although, like you said, we've all been traumatized. Even if you just lived through the pandemic, you've experienced trauma on a massive scale. So it's a reaction, because a reaction is unconscious. It's nonverbal. So you can't make any sense of it. You don't even know what's happening. See, a response requires consciousness. A response allows pause, but a reaction doesn't. So yeah, there are these stress and trauma reactions happening all the time. And the significance is that the amygdala, when it senses the threat, it taps the brainstem. And the brainstem is so unconscious, and it's fully connected to the rest of your body. So now our whole physiology is in this state of upset, and sometimes we don't even know it.
Yeah, nice. See, you have a video on your YouTube channel about what to do when a child is having a tantrum in the supermarket, and there's something on the shelf that they want and they can't have it, and they're doing a tantrum. And you go through the whole thing of how you help a parent work through that. I'm going to ask you to tell that story because I think it's how we can parent ourselves when we're in the same thing. So what you said, when the child goes into the supermarket and they see something on the shelf that they want those Cocoa Puffs. What they're trying to do is transition from the high of wanting that thing to the low of not getting it. The transition from the high of wanting that thing to the low of not getting it. And what you said to do was, have an agreements conversation before you walk in. Basically say, like, we're going to go in. This is the list of things we're going to get. We're not getting anything that's not on the list. Maybe put something on the list that they want and they can have that thing. And then when if they throw the tantrum because they have no, short-term memory, right? Is to say, it's okay. It's okay. Everything's okay. And just keep saying that. Translate that to us, because you and I, before we turned on the mic, that gave me an epiphany that we're spending our whole day, life not being the way we want it to be. We didn't get that sale. That person didn't talk to us the same way we wanted. And we're transitioning between what we wanted things to be, the high of what we wanted things to be, and the low of how things are. Can you translate that for us?
Bruce Perry is a neuroscientist famous in the child trauma arena. And he says that anytime we encounter a novel event, we perceive that event as a threat until deemed otherwise. So that is the stage of transition, right? Because when I use the Cocoa Puff analogy, I like to help parents understand that it's not just the Cocoa Puffs that your child is wanting. And it's just like for us, when there's something that we put in our head, that goes into our physiology at a level of comfort and soothing and excitement and dopamine that it's automatically triggered. So I call the kid the Cocoa Puff King. The kid doesn't just want the Cocoa Puffs. The kid is the Cocoa Puff King. He is swimming in free. He's backstroking it. And it is the most amazing thing ever. So then when the parent says no Cocoa Puffs, it shatters. It absolutely shatters. And you can feel the energy of the child just going into absolute overwhelm. Not because of the Cocoa Puffs, it was the fantasy. And that transition happens for all of us in various ways. And so learning how to breathe through, realizing you're not going to die. Sometimes we have to tell ourselves as adults, and I like to use those exact words because that's what that primal brain is doing. That primal brain is saying, you're going to die. If you don't get this thing, you're going to die. And I also say addiction is an external attempt to soothe an internal state. You get conditioned to think of that thing as the thing you gotta have. Oh my God, gotta have. You have to have it. And to not have it is a threat to your feeling and sense of survival. And so being able to recognize, number one, that we're not going to die. Number two, that we breathe. You have to breathe because that thinking's confused and distorted. That short-term memory is all suppressed. And then it could be tapping into that brainstem stuff. Your brainstem stores every memory you've ever experienced. So all your trauma, just like all your personality, everything about you is in that brainstem. But the brainstem doesn't differentiate between Mark's personality versus Mark's trauma. It's all tied into the brainstem. So the moment you get stressed and you don't get that thing, it can become completely overwhelming. And someone's sitting there looking at you and they're like, dude, what the hell is wrong with you? Right? You're completely reactive in that moment because you have to transition. And this is why I say to parents about kids is that two things. One, There's nothing wrong with a behavior outburst. A behavior outburst is the single best thing that can happen because a behavior outburst signals that the brainstem is open. And when the brainstem is open, we have the greatest opportunity to create change and influence. So there's nothing wrong with the behavior outburst because, too, you want to be able to create a positive repetition in the moment of that outburst because that's when you plant that, I call them a love weed seed. You plant that love weed seed right in the middle of that brainstem because Bruce Perry also says the brain returns to the way the event was handled the last time. So if I have a
Wow.
really stressful, overwhelming experience and you support me in a positive way, the next time it happens, because it will, my brain will first go back to the way you supported me.
Wow. I'm taking that in. That's so profound. I At this trauma weekend, the person who was facilitating, there was a bunch of people who regressed at this thing and were just. I even made a couple of nasty comments about how you really need to clean up after yourself. Like you're 30 something years old. Like let's take some responsibility. And at the end, the facilitator said that in this environment, a lot of us regress to the place we were when the trauma that we're working on is. And if we are reparented, if we are shown love and kindness and reparented in that trauma, in that state, then we have an opportunity to move through. And that just slapped me right across the face because I had all this judgment. I was like, grow up and all this stuff because I'm dealing with my trauma, but I'm still cleaning up my dishes and all that. That's part of my trauma is I clean up my dishes because I don't want to get caught not cleaning up my dishes, right? That Not by virtue, it's because I have to for safety, right? But
Mhm.
but the facilitators were showing so much kindness and so much deference to these people who to me were so annoying. And now what you're saying is they were reparenting them in the place where they were so that they have an opportunity to move through. And I'm moved to tears here. And it's just so beautiful. What you do is so profound and beautiful, Bryan. Blows me away.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch gears now,
Okay.
just to kind of your business world.
Mhm.
Uh, I know that you've built businesses, you've lost businesses, and there's been some trauma with that because you've won big and you've
Yeah.
lost big. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of how you navigate that and what you learned?
It's really I think probably like all things, it's experiences. And you learn from experiences and you grow through them so that you can navigate them more effectively. It's things that things that in business would stress a person who's never ran a business don't stress me at all, but they would completely overwhelm anyone else. And you just grow in your understanding of the cycles of what you're going through. And I remember I had a business, and I've actually started 20 over the years. I've had 10 successful exits. And I had this one company. I had been working really hard to get it going. And man, I I'm a grinder when it comes to a new startup because it's actually the point of the most excitement for me. And we one day we hit these numbers. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been getting to. This is what I've been working for. We're gonna have all these projections. Like I've been on top of everything. I had made sure my numbers were dialed in, which I've never been good at because I've got number trauma. I made sure we were so detailed, and I mean all these things that I felt like I had done that were the right things to create this image of this money that we were essentially now worth. Over the course of 30 days, I went from that place of, oh my God, celebration. Like we had $227,000 in monthly receivables that we hit. And it was just a matter of it coming in and starting to add up in the account to a meeting. We had a meeting probably a week, 2 weeks later. And the lady I had trusted with these numbers, she looks at me in this meeting and she said, "You don't think those numbers are real, do you?" I had done everything right. I had done everything right. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, we're not going to get that money. And I'm like, why is it on the paper? If we're not going to get it, why is it on the paper? And literally, I mean, it was like the rug pulled completely out from under me from, a couple $1 million a year business to zero, to now debt, to bills to pay, to family and kids to still support. And you have to permit yourself the space to transition. And remember, you're not going to die.
So
The worst,
transition from what to what?
from the high to the low. It goes right back from the high to the low. And in the low, we're not going to die. As long as we're breathing, as long as we're willing to get up, as long as we're willing to keep trying, and as long as we have goals and we're focused on those goals, and no matter what happens in the process and the journey of getting to the goal, as long as you stay focused on the goal and you give yourself some time to transition. There were times, Mark, I would sit in this, I created this little room in my little house. It was my little meditation room. And it had a window it was a long window, and it looked out into the little neighborhood. And I had my little chair, and I would sit there in that chair, and I'd get up, and there was nothing else in the room. I think there was like some Buddhist things in there. But I would sit there in this room, and I would just pace around and back and forth in this room. And then I'd sit down in this chair. I was just allowing myself to stress as much as I needed to stress. And then when I'd walk out of that room, just to let myself know, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And by doing that, I just really conditioned myself that, number one, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die. Even when I've lost everything, I'm not going to die. Number two, as long as I'm willing to keep pushing forward, I'm smart, I'm creative, I'm hardworking, I'm persistent, it's all going to be fine. And that's just been a cycle for me, but it always comes back to the same things. You have these highs and lows, and it was Spencer, what was his name? Spencer, the guy who wrote Peaks and Valleys, also wrote Who Moved My Cheese.
Okay, I don't know.
Spencer
I don't remember.
Johnson.
Okay.
Spencer Johnson. Peaks and valleys is that when you can appreciate your valleys the same way you can appreciate your peaks, it all changes. They all become peaks. And that's still the working of the brain. It's still the challenge with stress and with trauma, is when you can have your absolute most worst day. And recently I've gotten to this thing where people are like, well, how are you doing today? And I started doing this the last 2 weeks, Mark. I'll say, I'm doing fantastic. This is the best day of my life. This is the best freaking day of my life. It doesn't matter if my day is stressful that day, because literally, this is all I've got. I don't have anything else. I've got this day. And this is the best freaking day of my life. And it's like, I said it to someone, and then I said it to someone the other day, and now it's just my thing. This is the best freaking day of my life. This is it. And you know what? It may be a shitty day, and that's okay, because it's my day. It's my day. And tomorrow is going to be another amazing day.
My version of that is, if people ask me how I'm doing, I'm like, I'm awesome. And one CEO said to me, why are you always awesome? You're just always awesome. I said, because I have really low standards. Like, what? So I have really low standards. If my kids are okay, I don't give a shit about anything else. Like, the day's just fine and dandy.
Man.
Right. So low expectation, low standards. Bryan, when I think about marketing and doing some videos and things to promote the episode, I have to figure out find a snippet of gold to put out on the internet. Like, I have about 30 minutes of snippets of gold to put out for this episode. It's probably going to be either one of the last or the last episodes of Mastering Overwhelm, because we're switching over to the Rising Leader podcast. And I have to say, this is one of the most valuable, best conversations I've recorded in the 4 years I've been doing this, in the 400 and something episodes I've had. I'm in tears with the value you brought and who you are. Thank you for being here.
I'm so honored.
If people want to find you, where do they find you?
probably just go to bryanpost.com, Bryan with a Y. And
Okay,
then you can find all my stuff there.
I'm going to put all of that in the show notes so you can just click on it. I'm also going to put his YouTube channel because his videos are just so pointed and uplifting and awesome. Again, Bryan, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Mark.
To everybody else, I really, really appreciate your time and your attention. I hope this was valuable to you. I love you and have a great rest of the day.